Quick trigger warning. I love frogs. I hope you do too, but for anyone who doesn't, there will be a lot of clips of frogs as well as a snail and some beetles in this video, so if that sounds like it's not for you, feel free to click away. If you like frogs, please enjoy. Hello and welcome to week 8 of this rainy season garden video journal thing. It is Christmas week, which means that I have had very little time in the garden, so it's a relatively short one today. I will try to keep my blather under control. So I guess with that, on with the show. So because we have actually had a bit of rain, the grass is starting to come up. This is still low and tender, so it's quite easy to scythe, and in certain places I'm going to try and keep it scythed here to try and build the soil faster, but also keep it from being too much of a task when the rains end. One of the nice things about scything is that you can actually give a little bit more warning to any small wildlife around as you're scything, because basically if you do the backstroke with the blunt side of the scythe into the uncut area as you step forward, you can give a little warning to everything in there that a blade is about to come through, and they might want to sort of rethink their plans for the day. For anyone noticing that the scythe is going up and down quite a lot, and that it's a rather short blade, this is a bush blade, which is a rather short, heavy blade, which is quite ideal for when you're in narrow spaces. And I find cutting with it and avoiding the trees I don't want to cut down is easiest when you do this more sort of up and down motion, more like a golf swing than standard scything. I would not recommend this for cutting lawns because it will take you a very, very long time, and it will not be as tidy as if you do a standard sweeping motion with a longer, more typical scythe blade. I wasn't just scything for the clearing the grass though. I do actually have intentions to plant things there. This aloe, which I have put as CF Darway, I'm not entirely sure how to say. It's a very common garden aloe all over Zambia. It is not, as far as I can tell, one of the native species, but it is in gardens all over the country. It is very easy to propagate and very popular with a lot of our pollinators. Basically, if you just cut a stem cutting, very similar to the aloe arborescens in the first video actually, if you just cut a stem cutting, shove it in the ground, it isn't as fussy as a lot of succulents about how wet the ground is. I mean, if you were literally shoving it into a swamp, I'm sure it wouldn't thank you. But if you just cut and put it in the ground, you will find you get quite successful rooting. I've had ones where the bottoms have been eaten off by our usual friend the molerats, but they've fallen over and they've survived long enough to reroot the next season from the part that's fallen over on the ground in the middle of the dry season. They are very tough, and again, as I say, really good with pollinators. Now, these ones are going in as markers. One of the things they're going in as markers for is this, which is governor's plum. This is a native fruit. I've put the name as Mtudzu, which I believe is one of the Chinyanja names for it, but it seems to have a lot of native names, so I think there might be a lot of local variations. I've seen Mtudzu as well, and a lot much longer ones, which I am not going to butcher the pronunciation of here. It is a native fruit. It is very widespread throughout sub-Saharan Africa. It's a small round fruit. It tastes faintly like a slightly sour plum. The seeds are more like grape seeds, really. I will not be germinating them in the bag again. They do seem to come up very readily from where birds drop them, and it took several years for most of the seedlings in this bag to actually germinate. Though the first largest one I planted has been germinated for well over a year, and the rest have only come up in the last couple of months. So yes, so this is not one I recommend doing the bag method in. The trees have a very wide range, so they're quite tolerant of environmental conditions, but to give the seedlings the best chance of surviving any dry spells we might have before the end of the rains, and before they're fully established, I'm putting aloes into the western side just to shelter them as much as possible from the afternoon sun. It isn't perfect, but hopefully it will give them just enough of a boost to make it and turn into a part of a thorny little hedge. So another part of that thorny hedge is masao, which we saw being put in the bag a while ago. So this is the jujube, or ziziphus, the African jujube rather than the traditional Chinese wild date. Now, we had very good germination on the masao, and I'm hoping that, like ones I have bought in bags before I realized how easy they were to germinate, these should be pretty tolerant of damage. I'm planting them out quite early because sometimes native trees, because they tend to send roots down quite quickly, they sulk if you try and transplant them later. I also tried planting out the single masuku of that germinated, that I planted at the same time as these, but it was behaving oddly. It hadn't actually got any leaves other than the cotyledons, and when I opened it up, the root was barely existent. So, and none of the others germinated. So I think they might have been not the healthiest seeds when I got around to planting them, which is a shame because it would have meant I was planting something that wouldn't be covered in thorns one day. But ho hum. So once again, I'm planting these next to aloes. Again, partially as protection from large animals trampling, partially as protection from the sun, and partially as a marker. So that next time I have to cut the grass, I know where not to cut to avoid tiny tree seedlings. Once they're mature, they will be very tolerant of quite a lot of sun, but when they're small, they're tender, and so avoiding direct sunlight, I always think is a good plan for post seedlings. This is not a problem of direct sunlight. This is a problem with, once again, our perennial friends, the molerats. So if we pull up a yucca once it looks like this, you will see there are no roots left on this. It was a stem cutting. They have eaten the bark off the whole part that was underground. Now they can reroot from very small amounts of that bark, but generally speaking, it's easiest to ensure that if you cut off the damaged part and just shove it in the ground, the molerats might do this again, and then I'll just have to do the same again. As I'd gone and got the saw to do the yucca, I thought it might be a decent opportunity to do a little bit of cutting back of the young trees. You can see these things are heading up. Once again, I'm sort of mimicking the action of browsers. I'm taking off the lower branches, but unlike a browsing antelope, I am not taking all the green parts off the plant. I am leaving the part that I want to turn into a tree, which should hopefully encourage them up faster than they would go without me. One of the plants I'm cutting back is because we can't have any single episode without it. It is the sickle bush. You can guarantee that I got stabbed in the top of the head quite a few times while doing this. The branches I'm dragging off are once again going under a long row of guava trees that tend to get very wormy. I've actually got a little bit of footage of one of those guavas, so yeah, if you don't want to see things wriggling in fruit, look away now. Okay, so I did feed that to the chickens. The hope with this long hedge is that it will encourage things like the chickens and other larger animals that eat fallen guavas to eat those up, worms and all, and stop the breeding of the fruit flies, which, as much as they're beautiful little flies, are making a less palatable product. So hopefully, this little thorn line will help solve that. Now, I have a short story involving a mystery fruit, which I thought was a fig, and I took it off the little bush that had sprung up, and I ate carefully and slowly, and it was tasty, and I got all the way to the middle before I found out it was definitely not a fig, because it was quite different seeds to what you expect to find in a fig. So if I die, it is because of this mystery fruit, and then hopefully I won't plant more of them. But if I don't die, it was tasty, and I will eventually find out what it is. And so I'm trying to germinate those using the bag method. Also, some apricots. So apricot almonds, you do have to crack them out of the nut for good germination. But after a couple of days of soaking with regular water changes, they do tend to start to show signs of life. Not all of them germinate. They do actually do quite well if you manage to stop doing what I do, which is letting Thunbergia creepers climb all over them and suffocate them from the light. And one for any pesto lovers out there, it is time to harvest and propagate some basil. This is a perennial one. I don't actually know exactly which one it is. There are so many alternatives. It was sold as Thai basil, but I'm almost certain it's not. Basically, you just strip the leaves off, put it in water. I use a clear bottle so I can actually see whether the roots are developing. Put it in water, usually within 2 weeks of sitting on a nice sunny windowsill, you'll have roots. And don't worry if the plant is getting leggy and you feel like you need to do this, but you don't have an immediate use for lots of basil. I mean, why wouldn't you? Because it does actually freeze really well. It keeps its flavour much better than others that I've frozen. So yeah, so that's the basil. At this point, I think the internet's consensus is that the most adorable frog, and possibly most adorable animal that doesn't have feathers or fur, is a rain frog, so I'm assuming we don't need a trigger warning here, beyond the one at the beginning of the video. I do want to say that I have a concern about a lot of the videos I see of this. These are a common frog here, and they have a couple of very limited defenses. They are, I believe, very mildly toxic. They puff themselves up to look big when they think there's a predator. They are not good at running or jumping, so they don't move away fast. And as you can see, their burrowing does not happen at high speed, even if you consider adorableness to be a certain amount of protection, at least from some predators. I don't know how effective that is. One last thing they can do in their defense is to squeak, and I've only ever seen them do this once. One was being tormented by a gerbil one night, and it was trying to get away squeaking. I've also heard tell, and possibly have invented memories of when our tortoise managed to corner one and it screamed blue murder as it was murdered by the tortoise. But so many videos online I see of these squeaking, and literally the only times I have heard them do that, or heard of them do that in first-hand accounts that aren't a video online where you don't know the context, is when something has just tried to dismember them, which does make me a little concerned as to what is happening just before the adorable clip of a puffed up, indignant frog squeaking. I'd love to believe that the desert species, because I think it's usually the Namaqua rain frog that is in those pictures, is more highly strung than this one, but I don't know, and it's just a concern. So now there is going to be a sort of trigger warning. I don't think this would distress anyone, but it is content that I was very unsure about actually putting up. What happened was, I was going for an evening walk and I saw in an old net on top of the pump housing a rubber frog, which are beautiful little frogs, but it's what this rubber frog was doing that I think some people may find upsetting. So yeah, so if you don't want to see a rubber frog doing something that you wouldn't discuss in polite company, I guess you should probably click away now. As a reassurance, nothing is harmed in this video. But yeah, last warning, 3, 2, 1, go. So, yeah, it's pooping. Now, that it's pooping is strange enough, but why it felt the need to climb on top of a concrete box into a plastic net and then poop, I have no idea. Rubber frogs baffle me. I mean, sometimes they climb up the legs of composters into composters and decide to spend the winter there, and I just... They are definitely playing with a different set of cards to the rest of us. But yeah, that is now officially it, and I think I will see you next Tuesday, when hopefully we won't have any content that makes me feel like I need to use every euphemism under my belt.